Hey guys, welcome to another Jurassic World Alive video, and this video we're going to go over the A- tier for the 1.8 tier list. So A- we're getting into some, I guess, interesting territory. Not too much change here, honestly. I think 2 or 3 dinos dropped down, and then 1 or 2 came up. So let's go over them alphabetical order. Let's start with Ankylosaurus. And obviously, before we get into this, the same thing always applies, all level 26, no boosts, and yada yada. Alright. Ankylosaurus. So, this thing is kind of disappointing as a dino. It does have its highlights, obviously. Swap in invincibility is one of the best swap in moves in the game. Especially if you're facing stuff like Earldom. You swap in invincibility, you don't get Cloak Rampage. Doesn't mean you're gonna survive the Earldom, but hey, at least you're saving one of your dinos there, right? And just overall, great defensive abilities, long invincibility, short defense, got both of those. What's the point? I don't really know. But hey, it can put up shields, so there's that, and decent stats too as well. Damage, there could be more damage, honestly. HP, it's okay-ish, but then when you look at it, it has 30% armor. That HP is pretty great for a 30% armor. 114 speed, not the greatest, but it outspeeds all those slower dinos, which all of them do kill it anyways. Its biggest utility is just basically the swap in invincibility, a 2000 turn, 1 damage, rampage, and some invincibility skills to stall out some of those running dinos, Dalacaris, Onyx, and all those guys. So, yep, there you go. Ankylosaurus, moving on, Spiky Potato, and Kentrosaurus. And Kentrosaurus is still around here. Reason being, like, the thing that separates it from the other two, Gigaspika and Stegod, and it's probably this is probably one of the best A- tier dinos, if not one of the worst A tier dinos. It does what it does well, right? It does what it does extremely well. If you check moveset, instant invincibility, instant distraction, that's a really disgusting moveset to cycle, especially when you have 0.5 counterattack. And the base damage isn't terrible. 1000 base damage plus a 0.5 counter, that's not terrible. And 30% armor, over 5000 health, 115 speed. Just overall, it's just better than Ankylos in all ways. So Ankylos is probably one of the bottom tier, like, A- dinos, and then Kentra is probably one of the top tier A- candidates. Move on to another dino that has a lot of HP, I guess. Ardontosaurus. Ardontosaurus got a unique this patch, and nothing really changed too much for it, honestly. Looking at its stats, 108 speed, that's terrible. Crit 20%, that's great, although crit did get nerfed, so there's that to keep in mind. 1050 damage, 4650 health. The biggest thing about Ardontosaurus is it just dies way too easily. Everything else it does really great. Decel Impact, Fence Rider Rampage, that's great. Those are great moves, right? Not that a dino like it has too much use for Fence Rider Rampage with a 1000 base, but hey, with that much HP, you could take a few hits, and well, not really. You can't really take too many hits, but you could at least throw out a decel impact and then go for the Fence Rider Rampage, right? And also you got that instant invincibility to block a one turn high burst damage move. Definite Strike's also great for cloak evasion shields, obviously. And immunity is basically where this thing shines. Without immunity, this thing's a pretty big potato. So there we go. Ardontosaurus. Moving on to Dharma. Used to be a absolutely terrible hybrid, and then Ludia kind of buffed it, so here we are. 127 speed, that's back there again. Damage could be better, but then again, if you're relying on base damage for this thing, you're probably playing it wrong, even though it does have Fence Rider Impact and Superior Strike, but most of its damage output is probably going to come through the form of Swap and Wound and then Swoop for Darwozopteryx. Okay, moving on. Gorgasaurus. Gorgasaurus is not a bad dino. Unlike Onyx, and this is where they like kind of differ a lot. Both are really great revenge killers. Onyx probably needs to be in a revenge killer situation like 90% of the time, and Gorgo only needs to be in that position like 80% of the time. And, you know, some folks would, oh, wouldn't that make Gorgo better than Onyx? Well, no, not really. Onyx, first of all, is faster and has immune, and is a bit harder to kill overall. But what Gorgo does have over Onyx is a higher base damage, so there's that. And I guess that's better. And like a secondary move to use after you use the DSR, that actually deals a decent amount of damage as well. But the biggest problem with Gorgosuchus is it dies way too easily. It's paper. It's basically paper, this thing. But, you know, when you get it rolling with a Ferocious Strike setup, it will do a lot of damage. Moving on to Kula Bunga. So, this thing's actually pretty interesting. I think this thing is kind of underrated, honestly. Its moveset's great. Swap and Distraction is, again, absolutely phenomenal swap and move. Instant Invincibility, you got that there. Distracting Strike, short defense. It's hard to really get too much damage to it. And look at its base damage, even though it doesn't have any multipliers. 1.4k base, but it does have all these defensive capabilities. Like, this thing is decently hard to kill. The only biggest problem with it is, honestly, is its speed, which doesn't really make too much sense, concerning both of its components. Actually, no, Rambo I don't think is that quick, but concerning, you know, Kula Gen 2 is actually decently fast. I was surprised it's not like at least 119, 117, but it's 115, which isn't the greatest. So, you know, here we are. Moving on, Megalith Samus is an interesting cat. So, Megalith Samus got better last patch, and got better this patch as well. But the reason why I dropped it here is not because it got worse, because it got better. Nothing really changed for Megalith Samus, except like all the dinos around Megalith Samus. It just makes Megalith Samus a better dino to use. But it did drop in a bit of usability, because what Megalith Samus did really well before, and was the biggest Indominus killer. But now Indominus got nerfed a bit, and there are quite a few number of dinos that could also kill Indominus more reliably than Megalith Samus. Megalith Samus obviously has its better usages as well. It's great team player, you know, swap into an unsuspecting dino for that counterattack, take them out, you know, all that stuff. Ferocious Strike, it is a revenge killer dino, but it's one of those counter dinos that's really, really hard to set up, and that's why its Sun Guy is just so good in comparison to all the other counterattack dinos. So yeah, moving on. Surberg, this thing never really was so good, but it got really decent recently with the recent changes. So Immobilize is a really good move. So with Immobilize, what a lot of people fail to utilize, and when folks use Sarkorixes, a lot of times turn 1 they just go for Ferocious Impact for that huge damage, then Greater Stunning Strike, which is, you know, basically a Greater Stunning Impact. But if you actually use Immobilize turn 1, and then go for Greater Stunning Strike turn 2, then Ferocious Impact turn 3, you could actually find some pretty surprise matchup kills. And also, you could still set it up as well. Although, honestly, people who use Sarkorixes as a revenge killer, it's not a terrible idea, but like, it's total waste. Like, why? Unless you really want to set up Greater Stunning Strike on turn, but you know, you could just Immobilize and go for that instead. Which, the only drawback there is, if you do Immobilize turn 1, it does give your opponent also another turn to work with their cooldown, so that's usually a Rampage coming your way. So if you're facing like a Dialrac something, boom, Greater Stunning Rampage, yikes, you probably don't want that. Which is where revenge kills come in handy. But then again, you know, if you use Ferocious Impact for your revenge kill, that's Sarko's huge damage move, which if you use it in that way, it's kind of a waste. And cooldown 3 turns. But it does have decent stats to survive, to get it back, along with the Mobilize, which helps as well. Health, 4.2k health. Not the greatest, but not terrible either. 25% armor, great. 118 speed, great. 1.3k damage. Not the greatest, but, you know, workable, especially with a huge Ferocious Impact. Doesn't have to worry too much about its base damage. Well, actually, well, it does. It literally depends on its base damage, but I think you guys got me. Moving on to Skulosaurus thing. So, health. 4,440, damage, 1,000. Biggest thing about it, base damage, if you look at its stats, but no problem because it has 2 rampages. And long protection as well, which is okay, which helps with its defensive capabilities, which it already has a decent, you know, a decent defensive stat, decent health, and 40% armor. Or not 40%, 30% armor, and 117 speed. With Swap and Null. Swap and Null is probably one of the worst swapping moves. It really isn't too useful, honestly. So there's that as well. Nullifying Strike, overall just great move set. The base damage kind of sucks, but then again, you got 2 rampages. Although turn 1, if you really want to go for a lot of damage output, you use Rampage turn 1, then you might get hit hard a bit, and then because Distracting Rampage does have 1 turn delay, so it really, Skulosaurus, you really have to work with its work around its delays and cooldowns, all that, to actually utilize it better. So moving on to our second last one on the list by Onyx, the Spino Gen 2 plus Berry Gen 2 hybrid. This one, it dropped. Reason being, it actually gets stopped quite a bit. The 1,000 base damage really does hurt it a lot. Like, its move set is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, it's a phenomenal move set. 2 of its moves don't care about base damage at all. And aside from that, the other 2 things are just health and speed. Health is not terrible, but for 124 speed, like, remember, 124 is beneath 126, so huge red flag there, right? Beneath 126, 128, 129, 131, huge red flag. Not that it's a terrible speed tier. 124, you still got your, you know, Triodissus, Triastronics matchups, etc., and all that stuff taken care of. And you also have the most important ones, the tanks matchups that you got taken care of. But if you're just facing dinos that just counter your moveset, you just kind of get screwed here. And this is why what was it? Spinosuchus is actually better than Spinonyx. It does have that, like, if bleed doesn't work, it does have that huge critical impact. Even though crit impact got nerfed, but it still has that great damage with critical impact, and 129 speed also helps it a lot. So there's that as well. Overall, not a bad dino. Like, look, all these A- dinos, they're not terrible dinos at all. Like, despite them being, but like you have to really see like the A tier as like a whole tier, kind of, and like the plus minuses, there are like minor differences, although, you know, some of them are pretty significant, but they're not as crazy as, like, you know, like an A plus tier dino versus like a B minus tier dino. That's a huge jump, right? So they're all usable dinos. Would I say any of them are really endgame dinos? Not really, but, you know, they all have their potential in some mid-game, mid-high tier, you know, battles and stuff. So, anyways, moving on to Tyrannosaurus. Tyrannosaurus is really comparable to Tyrannosaurus. It's just a worse Tyrannosaurus. Look at its stats. That 1 point in speed kills it, and just one of the reasons why it's not as good as Tyrannosaurus. Distracting Strike, that also is another one. Nullifying Strike versus Security Strike. At a glance, you could say, oh, Null Strike, Security Strike, they both have its, you know, both have its strengths and weaknesses. But when you actually look at the matchups, not really. Null Strike is not as nearly as useful as Security Strike. Security Strike is one of the best, you know, basic moves in the game for a reason. If not like one of the best moves, period, in the game for a reason. So that's a huge problem for it. And as I said before, the multiplier on the Distract also kind of sucks for it. But, you know, aside from that, a really solid tank busting dino if you really need one. DSI into DSR, your standard Rex stuff, except this thing's faster than Rex. Does less damage, but, you know, usually a Defense Shattering Impact, Defense Shattering Rampage from like 1.6k base usually gets a lot of jobs done if you're, you know, into tank busting. And if you can't kill it in 2 turns, put a distracting strike out there so you don't die, and then boom, boom, rampage, impact, send your enemy off. So anyways, I'm glad that I shortened this one a bit. So there we go, A- here, although we didn't have too many dinos in this tier to begin with. But yeah, that's all for this one. And oh, one other thing, I have fixed my phone screen. Took me like 2 to 3 hours. Like for those of you who've never fixed phone screens, it's not as simple as I just take this screen off and put the new one in. Like you have to detach the cameras, the sensors, you know, screw around with the logic board, the battery pack, all of it. There's so many steps. It's it's horrible to actually work with. So if you don't have warranty, don't break your phone screen. It is terribly difficult to replace. And yeah, if you do break it, probably have a professional to work on it. You don't want to break anything here. Although, it is a bit overrated about how hard it is, but it is decently hard. Anyways, moving on from that, that's gonna be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And leave a like if you did, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.